Thank you very much, Heather. I appreciate that. And like Heather said, this was a dual presentation. Nick was going to be leading off. Um, so we're going to make a little switcheroo and go ahead and get started. Just a few general housekeeping notes. Please ask all your questions in the chat box. Please don't unmute yourself. And we will do our best to take questions between sections once the talk gets rolling. I'll go ahead and introduce Nick. So most of you all probably already know him. He is the staff librarian here at Potomac State College, graduate of Clarion University. And you see his contact information on the slide. If you have any questions afterwards or next week or next month, please feel free to email Nick or myself anything, anytime. Some of you may already know me from my time at West Virginia State and Concord, and maybe through some of the other WVLA sessions over the years. My name is Seth Cottle. I started as the library director at Potomac State College on August the 1st. So I am still brand new in this role. I graduated from WVU with a BA and MA in history, and then went on to University of Kentucky, where I completed work for my MS in library science. I've worked in a variety of library departments and areas during my professional career thus far, but I must say that I love and have always gravitated toward the archives and special collections area. It's absolutely my favorite. So this newspaper project is very important to me. Before we jump into the actual newspaper slides, I just have a few quick comments that I'd like to share. First, I want to thank you all for stopping by our session. Time is very precious. We all know that. We can't manufacture it, and we never know how much of it we have left. So I truly appreciate you investing some of your time in the Potomac State Library this morning. We all know the conference was scheduled for Canaan Valley this year, and the pandemic has had other ideas. So I want to send my best wishes to all of you and all of your loved ones as we continue to weave through this health crisis. But please remember, librarians are adaptable creatures. And I've seen firsthand how libraries across the state continue to meet the needs of their respective service populations. Our newspaper portal is achieving this goal every day. And I certainly hope you are all as excited about the direction of the newspaper preservation as we are here at Potomac State. Working with special collections, preserving history, and making it accessible, and accessibility is the key. If you have this history, it doesn't do any good if people can't access it. But that is unquestionably my favorite area of librarianship. So when I started here in August, I was extremely excited to see the excellent work that the PSC Library had completed on the newspaper portal in the last 4 years alone. I'm impressed with what they've accomplished, but excited for what the future holds with this important initiative. So moving on to the next slide, here's our roadmap. This is just a brief overview. I will be talking on number 1 and number 2, why historic newspapers and some of the problems that we see in continuing this work. And then Nick will for sure be here by then, and he will take over for number 3, and number 4. So without further delay, let's go ahead and jump on in. So I wanted to start by just asking a few questions to get the wheels turning as we progress through the presentation. I'm not looking for any answers or responses. This is just to get our brains up and alive this morning. So what are the values of historic newspapers? Why do we even care about these old newspapers? Who uses historic newspapers? How do we locate these newspapers? And finally, what do we find in historic newspapers? Now, there are many questions, many more than these 5. And we could sit here all day and list them till our heart's content. But for our purposes today, I'm going to focus on the last question: what do we find in historic newspapers? I find this to be the most important because establishing what is within the pages will answer some of these other questions by default. So first, which you all probably already know this, we must always remember newspapers are primary resource material. They depict historical events of the time as they occur, sometimes on a daily basis. So this establishes an important firsthand timeline for the researcher. Second, newspapers provide a glimpse into the society norms of the time. So let's think about 1918 for a minute. This time is much different than 2020. From the terminology we use, the pastimes we enjoy, the advertisements we see, the cars we drive, and the health care that patients receive. So overall, there are not many similarities between 1918 and 2020. However, it's very safe to say that 1918 newspapers containing information on the influenza pandemic are currently serving as an important resource for historians and medical research teams across the globe. Without this information, parallels between the two health crises would be infinitely more difficult to understand, thus making the goal of saving lives more difficult. This is a current and relevant example that illustrates the value of preserving historic newspapers and the continuation of our newspaper portal here at PSC. A third type of information we find in these newspapers relates to family history and genealogy. Now, again, the possibilities are endless with this third topic. We have obituaries, marriage announcements, birth announcements, property sales, lawsuits, and maybe from time to time, divorces might even be in the newspaper. I've seen that. So you have a host of information here that the genealogy folks really love. And a fourth and final quick point to remember is newspapers are cross-disciplinary. The information preserved in newspapers touch on, again, such a wide array of topics. It's available for any type of researcher. Some that come to mind are the arts, social studies, natural resources, marketing, advertising, and on and on and on. Possibilities are absolutely endless with this. So from my perspective, we simply cannot afford to watch this information crumble away on our watch and lose all of this valuable history. So that brings us to the next question. I froze up for a minute there. Am I still connected? Okay. So that brings us to the next question. Since we've established some of the valuable information included in the newspapers, where do we go from here? What do we do next? So the response to this question is pretty much the way that I've always approached it, whether it's in the library or in life. You have to identify obstacles, and you got to work hard to overcome those obstacles. It's a very simple process. It's a lot of hard work, and you have to sometimes grit your teeth and go through countless hurdles, but it's just what you have to do. So, there are many risks, frustrations, and barriers currently facing these newspapers all across our county, all across the state, all across the country. So researcher frustration with using microfilm for local history and genealogy research, it has came up a lot throughout my career. The old microfilm readers, as you are all probably aware, are tricky and create havoc sometimes. Worries about long-term preservation of the microfilm. Preservation is always an issue. Here's a quote from a resource that we located while we were researching for this project. In addition, although steps have been taken to preserve the film, many of the rolls show wear from years of use, while others have developed vinegar syndrome and soon will no longer be a usable resource. Now, I don't know if anyone here has experienced the vinegar syndrome or not, but we did at West Virginia State. And unfortunately, a lot of that material was just, it's gone. Once the vinegar syndrome sets in, the opportunity for future use is really non-existent. So that's always something to keep in mind. Structure disasters. Now, this doesn't happen very often, but again, a lot of information over the years has been lost due to floods, storms, fires, etc. One example that comes to our mind up here in our area was the burning of the Intermountain newspaper office. Theft. You wouldn't think, but there are still a lot of sticky fingers out there these days, and sometimes microfilm reels will come up missing. And space. Space. I can't emphasize that one enough. I've never met a librarian or any library that has said, sure, we'll take it. We have plenty of space. So, you know, these microfilm cabinets are big, they're bulky, they take up a lot of space, and a lot of facilities simply are not equipped to house these microfilm reels. It's just a fact. And last, and probably most importantly, accessibility. As I said earlier, the accessibility portion of this talk is very, very important. Collections that are not accessible, I don't want to say they're useless, but they're pretty close. They have to be accessible to the service population, the community, and our patrons. And a few hurdles that accessibility shows us are some elderly patrons that might not be as mobile as they once were, maybe not able to even come to the library anymore. Folks with disabilities, expats who no longer live in the area but still want to remain connected to their local hometown communities. And finally, COVID-19. Boy, has this opened our eyes or what? The last, I guess we're going on 7 months now. Um, COVID-19 has really highlighted the need and continued development of accessible digitized collections from all libraries, whether public, uh, academic, special collections, everyone. So increasing and improving our digital access is a necessity for the 21st century library. If these valuable resources are not preserved now, they're going to be lost forever. And this is a race against time to save the history living on these microfilm reels all across the state. So with that, and for some more information on the solution side of the discussion, I'm going to hand the presentation over to my pal, Nick Gardner. So Nick, since you are now here, go ahead and take it away, my friend.
Oh, good. I did unmute myself or I guess the host unmuted me just in time for me to start. Sorry, we had some weird snafus here from the get-go. I'm actually going to go ahead and turn on closed captioning for the rest of this talk. Well, first off, Seth has outlined some of the major issues that we face with microfilm collections and also with special collections as a whole. And I really want to reiterate that point around COVID-19 being an eye-opening experience for all of us. I think a lot of us know the solution to this is digital preservation and being able to also share content digitally. Some of the benefits of digital preservation are the fact that we can transfer to multiple formats. It is easier to, which is nice because you end up in a situation where even though we don't know what the one true format of the future may be, we can feel fairly confident that different image file types seem to have held up over the past 20 years. And if we can select different formats to save in, then we know at least one of them will hold up. We know that these are easier to duplicate, certainly far less expensive than duplicating microfilm. Anyone who's ever had experience in that environment, and certainly it's a lot less costly to duplicate, free versus anywhere from $50 to $150, depending on what vendor you're working with for microfilm. Additionally, it's easier to discover, retrieve information when it's digitally available. Furthermore, if you work with a digitization service that provides optical character recognition or of your content, you know that you can find and seek out your material much more quickly that you're looking for. That ties in for me with the fourth law of library science, save the time of the reader. Additionally, and when you digitally provide microfilm online, you're also removing a lot of those barriers to physical access, and you're creating collections that are open when your library is not open, which for those of us who had to deal with COVID-19 as a restriction, just as an example here, I hope Seth didn't already give it, even though our library is currently open right now for our students, staff, and employees, or other employees, we are closed technically to the public right now, preventing one of our key communities that would like to be using our special collections from enjoying these resources. So if we were not digitally available, this would not be a solution. All right, so I know when it comes to a digital preservation project or in general microform conversion to a digital format, there's a lot of uncertainty. One, how to even get it done. And the big one that I'm sure I'll see a lot of nods in this audience on of how will I pay for it? All right, so there's also some additional big risks and fears that I've heard as I've talked to different people. One, will my collection not be as special if anyone can get into it, if they don't have to come and see it here in the library, if, like we just pointed out, potentially the content could be duplicated, etc. Does that make my content less special than before? Is it going to result in a decline in foot traffic or library usage? Let's face it, a lot of us small libraries live and die on this idea of foot traffic and being able to show people coming in and out. And if the patrons don't have to come to the physical building, and they can actually go and get on electronically, how is that going to affect us? How are we going to continue to show the value of the library and the value of these collections? And another one, a lot of times we have microfilm collections that are not necessarily available in other places. What could happen to our reels? You know, what's going to happen if they get damaged? That's a very genuine concern. So I'm going to be going over some of the basically these benefits and barriers, not just theoretically, but in practice from our experience here in the next portion of the talk. Real quick, we want to take this moment. I'm going to be going through the chat and seeing if we have any questions. The way I'll be dealing with this is I will read the question out loud, and then Seth and I will look at discussing it from there, so that way the question gets captioned, and for the people who are recording, that they don't have to rely on not being able to see this. All right. So it doesn't look like we have any questions at this time, but someone mentioned vinegar syndrome. That is a very real threat to these collections. All right. So it looks like we can move forward. Nobody seems to have questions. Gina, chat and ask real quick what we're using for closed captioning. Just so anyone knows who's having to do any kind of virtual presentations, Google Slides in the past few months has actually added a built-in closed captioning service. I try to take advantage of it when possible. One downside to it is if you are an excited, fast talker like I am, sometimes it has trouble keeping up. But from what I understand from working with people who use this, at least having some form of captioning helps people who are deaf or hard of hearing keep up to some extent, whereas without it, they wouldn't have that option. All right. So let's move on to our actual experience. So I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. I am Nick Gardner. I'm a staff librarian at Potomac State College. I've been with Potomac State for the past 5 years. I work alongside Seth Cottle. I also work with Virginia Klein, who I'm sure many of you all know. She gets around there. You know, we're a small institution. We serve a little bit more than 1,000 students. We're a little staff, little budget, and a little building. So all of those constraints and issues with the format of microfilm and special collections that Seth brought up before really do apply to us. We don't have a lot of room for even having our microfilm collection out on the floor. We actually keep it in a back room area and bring out the reels of interest if a patron needs to look over it. We have a small staff, so we can't do a lot of one-on-one time with this content. We can't do a lot of genealogy or obituary searches for people, even though, you know what, I personally enjoy that stuff. I love digging back in local history. I mean, who here, you know, let's face it, it's great. It's so many wonderful things that Seth brought up about what you see when you go back in there. It's just a different time, different era. Another issue, small budget. So however we take and undergo about dealing with something like this, we had to figure out a way to do it in an affordable way. All right. So again, how we got it done. We saw our staff time was limited, that providing access to that physical microfilm was a problem. So what we did is we targeted one major newspaper in our collection. We didn't seek out to try to do everything at once. We looked at the Mineral Daily News Tribune. That is the paper of record for Mineral County, West Virginia. And we combined both our state budget monies and donor funds to get it done. There's a little side story with this that the paper in our area no longer could afford to preserve their paper on microfilm. So we've actually gone ahead and taken on that burden in our budget to preserve the paper on microform as well. So we are still trafficking in, you know, microform preservation in addition to digital preservation. I've included our site link here. Oops, didn't mean to roll back on that. If you ever have any questions about accessing this or how this works, you can reach out to us. We'll provide our contact information again at the end of the talk. All right. We saw that with the success of digitizing this paper, we ended up actually expanding into other Mineral County newspapers, including the Piedmont Herald, which is older than the Mineral Daily News Tribune. And we also went into the Elk Garden News. So we've covered almost all of our major newspapers for our county. We were fortunate enough pre-COVID to have a little bit of budget money left over, and it just happened to align to being the right amount of money. I mean, I consider this just the fortuitous hand of fate, you know, reaching out and, you know, given us a benefit here. We discovered that that little bit of money we had left over was just enough for us to reach out with our public libraries and do their newspapers of record for their counties up until that historic cutoff point for, doing the stuff that was in public domain. So we were able to partner out with Hardy, Hampshire, and Grant County. Those are the counties around us, and get their stuff up as well. This is, again, another link to our portal. I've dropped that in the chat right there. We'll take a little bit of break between getting to the future and the going over how things went with us to answer some of the questions that have come up. What we do is we take advantage of LibGuides. Those of you who work in an institution with LibGuides know how wonderful they are. We use this to not only provide a link to the vendor's website that we work with, but we also put up tutorials on how to use the site. We link to recordings of our webinar and workshop. We're going to make sure that we link out to this, the slides for this presentation as well, and to the recording of this. We try to basically have it up that everything around this project is on this site. We also include links to where our patrons can get West Virginia newspapers from other sites, whether it's the wonderful Chronicling America program that's been undertaken by the National Digital Newspaper Project and West Virginia Regional and History Center and the Library of Virginia in Richmond. We wanted to make sure our patrons knew they could get that content as well. All right. We work with a vendor called Advantage Preservation. We've had a great experience with them over the past 3+ years. We like that they, don't just get the scans up and then we're left trying to figure out how to organize them. They actually provide a really nice interface, which is capable of Boolean searching, capable of searching within date ranges, really specific. You can look on a single day if you want. It provides browsability by title. You don't see it on this screenshot here, but it also provides browsability by city. It provides browsability by decade and by individual year. So if you have a patron who actually likes that experience of sitting down and rolling through the microfilm or flipping through the newspaper pages, they kind of get a replication of that. It's not just, oh, I do a search and pull up those search results. It provides multiple ways to get in and out of it. All right. Again, how we paid for it, we mixed and matched state and donor funding. This was heavily driven by donor funding. We had generous donations from many people who were really excited about getting this going. And one of our alums, who is wonderful, gave us more than $20,000. So, I mean, but this was over time. He did not just give us one cut check for this. He cut us, $5,000 here, $5,000 there, as he saw that we were making progress for this. So we did this very incrementally. How do we feel about our collection? Is it less special? I would actually go as far to say that our collection is even more special than before. We have more counties, more titles represented than our physical microfilm collection actually was. We're providing more than 450,000 pages of content, currently representing more than, that's a typo there, it should be 20 newspaper titles. And we're providing access to, like I said, 4 counties, not just Mineral County. So this is wonderful for us. Basically what we've done is we traded off the physical collection and the limitations of it for having a wonderful, unique digital collection that has been great for, again, expanding our coverage, but also creating new partnerships. It's not just about us. It's not just about our collection, but it's about the public libraries that we're working with as well. We have also some other public libraries and another college library that we're hoping to work with in the future as we identify more funding. How did this affect our microfilm usage? I'm going to be honest, I didn't even bother to pull statistics up for our microfilm. We probably only had one patron come in and use our physical microfilm a month. Those of you who have microfilm collections, you guys know how it is. It's typically a small niche group of users who comes in and they use it sporadically. You probably don't have someone using your microfilm machine every single month, every single day, unless you have an especially large collection. We've actually found that since fall 2018, we've had over 400,000 page views. Far more than half of this has been since the beginning of this year. We've been very aggressively promoting this platform since the fall of 2019 through community workshops. We've had to switch to virtual, dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. We've had more than 20,000 sessions logged, 50% of them in the past year. So as far as the usage goes, this is great. We've been able to sit and mark down and say, hey, we really are getting better value out of this content than we were before. Again, also, we're finding out meaningful results because it's available digitally, and because we follow a lot of the social media groups for our area. We're seeing how our users actually are using this content and how they're sharing it. One of the other things, Seth mentioned how a lot of times the people who would be interested in these collections do not live here. We did a short little survey over the past few weeks. We found that 30% of the site's users report as being West Virginians living abroad, and it's places as far-flung as Iowa and Missouri. I think we're the furthest out. There might have been someone from Texas, but that's all, relative. The point is, these users would not have been able to take advantage of our microfilm collections if we had only had the physical collection. Again, I mentioned meaningful results. We've been told that this was actually used for research for a local national organization of women's group as they were researching the role of the Hampshire County area in the 19th Amendment's passage. Those of you who may know a little bit about this, the Hampshire Review was actually owned by the governor at the time. And so there's some nice documentation of that in the paper. It's wonderful. We have a lot of local history authors who have used this as a source for articles and books. And additionally, just in putting together some little workshops for the area, I found it's a great comparative tool for the 1889 and 1980 pandemics to our present day. I'll be going over how that's actually benefited us when we're looking for some money in a little bit. Additionally, we've got some quick quotes. We're letting our users speak, so it's not just hearing from us. Said, newspapers helped me bring life to long departed ancestors. This resource was essential for an article I wrote. I can find my relatives. I was able to retrieve my father's obituaries. Yes, they could have done that with our physical microfilm, but this took away all the barriers to getting there. I'm a PSC alum and proud of my alma mater for providing this service. This is always a good thing we like to hear. We want to hear that we're keeping our students happy even after they leave us. I started looking at these newspapers and I couldn't stop. I hear this this is one user saying it, but I hear this quite a bit. People get on there and they just can't stop looking. There's so much. You just go down all the rabbit holes. And most importantly to me, I would love it if more counties were added to the collection. We love hearing that from our users. They love the fact that they can get on for these 4 counties, but they'd love to see more. I'm able to use this and then from the librarian perspective, one of our local librarians down at Kaiser actually said, I'm able to use this to more quickly help patrons find local history information. We don't have microfilm at our library. In the past, the Mineral County Public Library had to send its users up to our building to be able to even get into the microfilm, to be able to look at this stuff. Another librarian where they actually do have microfilm, she says, a lot of my patrons ask for information on local history. We have microfilm, but I'm often busy as a solo librarian. Actually, this particular librarian, I don't think it's speaking out of turn to say I know that she's also on the city board. She's part of the city pool organization. She has her hand in a lot of pots. I think any of you guys who are small town library directors can sympathize with this. You guys are in a lot of really busy roles. And she said this makes it faster for them to find information and print it off. They have a wonderful microfilm reader there, but they don't have the ability to print from their microfilm reader. And then finally, the big question, are our microfilm reels okay? Let's face it, there's always that risk and concern when we take something unique and valuable. What could happen if it gets damaged? Well, we've scanned over 300 reels working with Advantage Preservation, and we've never had something come back damaged. We felt confident enough that we were able to risk things that didn't just belong to us, but to other public libraries in our area. No reels have ever been lost. Everything has always come back to us safe and sound and organized. We've never had a reel come back in the wrong box. Everything has been great. Also, I just want to speak out to the fact that countless other libraries around the U.S. are in fact working with the vendor that we work with. This is a nice map showing where their partner libraries are all around the U.S. It's something like 300 plus libraries. So we work with a fairly trusted vendor, not some fly-by-night operation. Where this takes us from this point forward, we really want you to join us. We view this as an opportunity where we can partner with you and around the state. Like I said, we already have some public libraries and other college libraries in mind. It makes more sense to me personally that we provide one unified place where users can go for West Virginia newspapers, rather than, oh, well, if you're in this county, you have to go here. If you're in this county, you have to go here. It makes more sense that, let's try to get together and get this on one portal. One of the things we like about our vendor is, as long as we can find the funding, we don't have to pay annual costs for hosting. We pay a one-time upload fee. We still retain the ownership, or the public library that Let the Reels retains the ownership of the content. The vendor signs off on an agreement. They are not allowed to share this content or repurpose it for commercial purposes. So I know that's a big deal and concern. We also get digital backups on a hard drive. So the nice thing I mentioned about that digital preservation aspect before, it's nice. Not only do we have our newspapers on microfilm reels, but we know there's a microfilm backup at the vendor as well that they have made. We know that there's a digital backup at the vendor. There's also the version on the site. We have a hard drive backup and maintain other hard drive backups of the same content. We are looking for dealing with this, looking for a more aggressive preservation environment in the future. So we are going to continue to explore that. I outlined this goal in our meeting over the spring. I would really like to see representation. It doesn't even have to necessarily be on our site, but that would be ideal, of all 55 counties of West Virginia by 2025. Presently, only half of West Virginia's counties have any historic newspaper representation, whether that's on Chronicling America, our site, or some scattered little initiatives here and there. We actually got the good fortune of getting a nice chunk of money from a COVID-19 related grant that was internal at WVU. We're looking at digitizing, partnering up with the state archives to do reels from 1918 to 1920 from counties that do not have any coverage right now. We think this will really help as we're trying to go out and look for additional grants to say how we've expanded our coverage. And so if you're interested in this, reach out to us. We'd like to partner up with you. We think this makes more sense. We know there's a lot of vendors reaching out to different libraries right now. We really like working with this vendor. We think the product that we get is exactly what we want from a vendor. All right. So again, if you're interested, reach out to us. We'd welcome partners of any kind, public or college. All right. So again, thank you. We're going to go back through the chat now and look at some discussions here for the people who've asked. All right. And Seth, if you want to unmute and jump in here to answer any questions, feel free. Our first question's from Gina Chatton. She says, did you have to negotiate any rights with the local paper to be able to preserve and reformat newer issues of their paper? Yes. The first paper that we did work with was the Mineral Daily News Tribune, like I mentioned. Basically, we got permission from them to do content that was beyond the public domain. Anything that's in the public domain that's prior to that cutoff year is actually fair game to convert to digital and provide. But we wanted to provide content that was more recent as well. So they actually happily signed over to us. And as I mentioned before, we've actually taken on the burden for this newspaper because they're very small. They're down to about 4 days a week of doing their microfilming for them as well. And we had to also, and we actually talked to our local newspapers in our 4-county area. And we are actually starting to digitize content for them outside of the public domain. I've had to sit down with the editors of every one of these newspapers and discuss what we want to do. And they have all been very supportive of providing this content, this historical content, because honestly, for the most part, a lot of them don't have the way to access it any longer. A lot of newspapers have lost access to their historical stuff, either through, incidents that have happened at their sites or not having microfilm readers anymore. etc. So this site has provided a valuable benefit to them for them to be able to look at their own history as well. Amy Stover asked about what service did we use for digitization. We work with Advantage Preservation out of Iowa. One of the reasons why we'd encourage people to reach out to us if you're interested in digitization. It's always easier when we talk to a vendor. If we talk to a vendor as a united front, we can ensure that we're all getting a decent rate that way rather than what they may be offering to individual libraries. I happen to know that this vendor, as well as other vendors, quote a lot of kind of different prices to different libraries. And I think if we work together, we can ensure that we're getting the best value out of this process, which, since we're all basic, even though, some of us are state libraries, our college libraries, we are funded by public money. So we need to make sure that we're getting the best benefit for our taxpayers. Patricia Barnett asks about what about copyright issues with newspaper content that has been already microfilmed by a commercial vendor or venture. If the content is in the public domain, they shouldn't actually have ownership of that. Seth, if you want to chime in here, they shouldn't have ownership of the expression, they only have ownership of that digital expression that they have created. They shouldn't have ownership of the microfilm itself. It may be, if you want to reach out to us, we can do some investigation and see what's going on with that, if your case is dealing with that. But we have not yet encountered that as an issue at all so far.
Another thing that I've found, Nick, from previous projects at other places, I've never had one complaint about any additional archival information being more accessible on anything, whether it's a newspaper, a yearbook, event program, anything. So I really believe that while the copyright issues are important, I understand that, I don't think there's going to be that much pushback.
And again, we would like, if you'd like to talk with us, we would like to hear more about you. If you have a particular case in mind or you are currently dealing with this, Patricia, please do reach out to us. We'd love to look into it, see what's going on there. Connie Skidmore brought up if we had recommendations for specific items. We're actually undergoing a somewhat slow process right now, as Seth can attest, but we're actually trying to move to digitize our entire special collections over the next few years. And we're also looking at how different vendors right now. So for everything outside of the newspaper project, because of the particulars with the medium that we're originally starting with, we're considering the Internet Archive. Connie, feel free to email us. Feel free to give us a call. We'd be happy to talk more about it. Karen and Paul at Upshur County said, none of the microfilm that we own is in the public domain. Is there a way around that? Give us a call. What we would recommend is that if it's about your local newspaper will probably gladly allow for digitization of that older content, because they may well not have the ability to even access it as is. We have not yet encountered a local newspaper that was resistant to digitizing microfilm. Now, I would be, the bigger papers, I can imagine that being a problem, but I've not encountered a local newspaper, even a regional newspaper, that has not been supportive of the idea of making this stuff more searchable. Danielle Ice Davis asked, does the vendor only do microfilm? They do have other digitization services. We haven't looked into them because we're kind of going a different direction for content that is not on microfilm. We're planning to do a lot of our digitization in-house, and one of the drawbacks of this new reality of working from home is, you never know when a dog may start barking. Sorry about that, folks. So we haven't worked with them about content that isn't microfilm so far. so we can't speak to it, but I do know that they do other stuff. If you have questions about digitizing non-microfilm content, feel free to reach out to us. We're currently dealing with digitizing bound items and flat sheets and photos at our library. Mary Jo, hi Mary Jo from Davis and Elkins says, is the scope of our project only local community newspapers, or could it also be the college newspaper? That's a great question. Actually, our college newspaper, the Pasquino, also happened to be on microfilm. It made sense to us since it was only a couple little short reels. We went ahead and digitized it as well. We are encountering some high school newspapers in our communities, and because we're encountering those already on paper copies, we're dealing with their digitization separate from this project. But you know, if your content is on microfilm, there's no reason why it couldn't be made digitally available on our platform or your own working with the vendor. Then we have one more question. Is there a clearinghouse for digitizing yearbooks from schools? That's from Mary C. I have no question. I have no idea about that. That's a great question. Typically, we've worked with, we're actually trying to explore that right now. We are not sure about the answer to that. So.
Nick, there was one other comment from Barbara Fields down in McDowell County. Hey, Barbara, you're absolutely right about the mine disasters and sporting events being important topics covered in some of these newspapers. Everywhere I've worked, everywhere, one of the top 2 or 3 requests is sports, whether football, baseball, basketball, what have you. So that is an absolute excellent point that you make about the newspaper coverages that I omitted from my list earlier. As I said, the list goes on, and that's a prime example.
Patricia Barnett, you mentioned that there is a company that has contacted you using prison workers to digitize yearbooks for free as training. I imagine that is probably OCI out of Oklahoma. They actually did our yearbook our yearbooks from our college as a joint venture between our college library and Lyrasis. To be honest, we've actually just now started getting into book digitization here. And frankly, I found that the results from their scanning were not better, if ultimately even worse from what we've been able to do in-house. The other thing I noticed from my experience working with them is OCI this is not to rag on OCI because I know that they are doing a lot of work out there, but they do not provide a digital platform for the content. You know, they take advantage of the Internet Archive, which actually any of you, if you scan your own content, there's nothing to stop you from putting your content as long as it's in the public domain or you have the appropriate rights permissions from putting it on the Internet Archive and making it available for everybody. That's the same platform OCI is using. So. Tara asks for a ballpark figure on the digitization of a roll of microfilm. Right now, I'd say it should not be more than $150. We have a rate right now that we've argued for that we're getting about $135 with our vendor. This is another reason why we really want to get people who are interested in doing microfilm digitization from newspapers in touch with everyone in the state. And why I think we need to work collectively, because we need to be seeing that we're getting the best rate from these vendors. I know from some other instances where Advantage Preservation quoted people 170 to 2, and see, we've never had to sign any kind of NDA or anything. So I'm not breaking contract or breaking any laws right now by sharing this information, but we need to talk to each other about what we're being quoted by these different companies, and we need to work together to make sure we're getting the best rate. Sorry, I didn't say what they had quoted. I'm aware that they have quoted as much as $200 to people for a reel. And so that's why I think it's important that we all talk to each other and make sure that we're getting the best rate possible. Patricia Barnett, you mentioned that you have microfilm readers that are set up to digitize microfilm. We actually do have one of those as well. It's a Scan Pro. The problem that we found with that is when it comes to digitizing newspapers, we couldn't balance and justify the staff time of digitization versus working with the vendor. The way it's set to recognize the difference between pages, it looks for the margins of the pages and cuts off. And we ended up finding that it just made more, when we started to try to actually do the math of it, et cetera, it just didn't make sense to us. We love our Scan Pro. We love it to death. You know, we used to have one of the old rattle boxes, and, you know, I've got a special place in my heart for those too. But when I do have to go back to the microfilm, I really do like working with it. But as far as large scale digitization projects go, I found doing it in-house just wasn't feasible for us. Elizabeth Tackett, she brings up that our library digitized newspaper clippings from newspapers nationwide. We also manage our Facebook page, Memories of the Buffalo Creek Disaster, and posted some of the articles to this page. We were advised this is not legal and we removed the material. What is your advice on this matter? No matter what, you've always got to follow what the copyright law says. If the content is after the public domain cutoff year, you really shouldn't be sharing that content. Well, that's one of the things that we make sure we do is, even though we have an agreement from our local newspapers to provide the content digitized that's outside the public domain on our site, we do still respect their ownership of the material, and we do not reshare content onto our Facebook page or elsewhere if it is not within the public domain years. We want to make sure we're always respecting the intellectual property of these groups. However, if the newspaper clippings you have are in the public domain, I believe the current cutoff year is 1925. It might be 24. I get a little fuzzy on that. And it's prior to that, there actually shouldn't be a reason why you can't post that. Seth, you want to chime in here? I know you deal with a lot more local history.
Yeah, I think it's 1925, and then in January it will go back one extra year. But right now it's 25, I believe.
And it's funny that we're talking. One of the things will be, we don't want to get into too deep right now. We are looking for some options right now for how we can share copyrighted material with our patrons digitally, but we're still exploring those solutions because we do have quite a bit of information in our special collections, especially our rare books, etc., that are still in copyright. So we're still exploring the solution for that. Maybe that'll be something we talk about in the future. I know that's a problem that's faced by all librarians everywhere, is balancing the desire for wanting to share information with our patrons and wanting to make things available, but also still respecting the rights of creators. And also preventing ourselves from getting sued is always a concern too. So. Tammy Smith asks, our library doesn't own newspaper microfilm, but we do have some county courthouse records on microfilm. Are those being digitized anywhere? At present, I'm not aware of any major initiatives in our state to digitize county courthouse records. Maybe that's something that the folks at WVLC can provide guidance on. We too have some county courthouse records on microfilm. We're really trying to avoid putting more content out on our vendor that is not newspapers. We would like to ideally be using the Internet Archive or some other portal for that kind of stuff. We don't have a solution for that yet. Again, I'm not sure at this time what kind of rights may need to be respected about those items right now. And then Gina Chatton brought up the special collection survey they are sending out. Yes, please fill that out. We did, that way they know what's going on. I think our biggest concern when we undertook this project is we just wanted to make sure that we were really providing this content in a manner that is free and accessible to our users. I know that there are other vendors who do this. I know that Ancestry does it. One of the problems with Ancestry is that their content is typically site locked, meaning you have to be on location to get access to it, or be paying for their subscription service. And it did not make sense to us for us to be charging for an outside company to be charging our users to use content that should be freely available. It just didn't seem right.